Welcome to the Bible Savvy Podcast, a weekly conversation about how to understand, enjoy, and apply God's Word. It's time to jump into a new passage from the Bible Savvy reading plan.
All right, hello, Bible Savvy Nation, or Savvies, or Savants, or something.
Bible
I don't know.
Savvy citizens.
Citizens of the Bible Savvy Nation. We're glad to be with you. I'm with Pastor Courtney and Pastor David. David, you have a question for us.
I do. Listen, yesterday there was an event on TV. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's called the Super Bowl.
Is that like a new DC movie? Like
Yes.
Marvel or
run?
DC?
Do
like
they
it's,
run in that?
I like
Superman,
superhero
Super
stuff.
Bowl
That's
race.
awesome.
Something like that. But anyways, my question for you guys is an either or. Would you rather play in the Super Bowl or watch it from the first row? And this is assuming you've been magically given the abilities to play.
I don't know if you
at
can
the
see me.
level of the Super Bowl.
I would
okay?
like to watch
Like you
the
just
Super
woke
Bowl
up.
from the first row with Clayton playing exactly as he is right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, you let's pretend you have the athletic ability and the knowledge of the game of football to be able to play in the Super Bowl, or you're like, that just sounds awful. I don't want to do that. I'd rather just be in the front row enjoying it with a plain hot dog and
plain hot dog and no
pickles.
So I absolutely would be watching. Okay, look, I understand. I appreciate the conditions on the question. If you are actually good enough to be
Yes.
in the game, even the people who are good enough to be in the game still walk away with concussions. And part of me is just like, this just seems, I don't know. Maybe I'm like, wah, wah. Everybody loves football, but part of me is just like, oh my gosh, guys. Don't care about yourself, please. I don't know. So, but that being said,
You're gonna watch.
I do enjoy watching a football game when someone requires me to do so.
Okay.
Good.
So my answer, I'm going to take option 3.
Oh boy.
Oh, boy.
Oh,
I know.
gosh.
You're gonna
Okay.
watch and play at the same
No.
time?
No, she's
No.
going to a cross country meet or something.
I'm gonna run laps around the field while other people play.
Well, so few know, and now the entire Bible Savvy Nation will know, that when I was a child, my goal in life, my career aspiration was to be a Dallas Cowboys cheerleader.
Oh boy.
Now, you need to know,
So how'd that
for
work
those
out?
of you getting hung up on the Dallas Cowboys part, it was only because when I was a kid, we had relatives who lived in Texas, and we went to the stadium, and I got a T-shirt that had a cheerleader on it, and it said, when I grow up, I want to be a Dallas Cowboys cheerleader.
That is the worst message to send to a little
Oh
girl.
my
That is there are like so many things wrong with that.
So I was like, that is what I want to be. So if you're telling me that I can live that out for one game,
No.
I am choosing to be a cheerleader
No.
for the Super Bowl. That's what I'm choosing. That's what I'm choosing.
Not an option.
No, that's option 3. And as a female, that's how I play the game. So
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
I choose to
Oh my
play
gosh.
Okay.
as a female on the cheerleading squad. Thank
Okay.
you.
Or you could be the first woman to play in the Super Bowl.
That's
I mean,
that's true.
you know.
I could be, or
Yeah.
I could
Be
be a
famous.
cheerleader on the sidelines.
gosh.
No concussion.
All right. Wow. Okay. These questions always go a different direction than I think.
No.
All right. So, Clayton, your reason was they all leave the game with a concussion, but there's one position that doesn't leave the game with a concussion for the most
Kicker.
part.
Kicker.
The kicker.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
And when I was in high school, I was a soccer player. But my senior year, my best friend was the quarterback, and he came to me and he's like, "Hey man, we have a great team, but we don't have a single guy on the team who can kick the ball through the uprights when we score, and we need someone who can reliably kick." And he's like, "I told my coach I have a soccer player friend who could probably do that." And so my senior year of high school, I would show up to football practice for 30 minutes, kick a few field goals, and then go to soccer practice. And then I got to play on Friday nights and kick.
Oh my
and
gosh.
it was so much fun that if I had the opportunity to be the kicker in the Super Bowl,
That's what you do.
100% I'm in.
I mean, that
yeah.
is all guts and glory. The
Yeah.
kicker is all
Yeah,
guts and glory because it's
You're
either
either
going to
blamed
go real
or
bad
credited.
and it's
Yes.
all
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
or it's going to go real good. And
Oh,
it's
I
all
would.
you.
I would love that thrill. I absolutely 100%. I'm in.
All
That'd be
right,
super fun.
I confirm that I'm not okay with this. Let's move on. We are in the book I don't know how we go from that to Leviticus. Okay. We are starting in the third book of the Bible this week. And let's be honest, this one is a challenge. And you probably already realized that if you've just done Monday's reading. This is a little bit ahead of that, but it gets detailed pretty quick. Mm-hmm. So you are probably already thinking, oh, help me. How am I going to make it through the next 3 weeks? So let me give you a little help. Big context of Leviticus to start to understand what some of this stuff is, okay? First of all, on Wednesday, we are going to be releasing an interview I did with Dr. Michael Morales, who is an expert in Leviticus. He's going to give some context, explain the big picture of this. So look out for that coming later this week. Second, the Bible Project has actually really good, like they always have good videos, but they have really good videos when it comes to Leviticus. So there is a video that does the normal like chart the book kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Actually watch the other one that's like a more animated kind of explanation. You can also watch the one on holiness and the one on sacrifices. All of those are really, really helpful for understanding this. The other thing you can do is, and I'm going to try and see if we can get this done before, when this airs. I did a class on the book of Leviticus. Now, it's 2 hours long, so it's not for the faint of heart, but we have it posted on the Bible Savvy page on the website, but I'm going to try and get it posted on the new Bible Savvy YouTube page. So if you want to go there, that goes in much more detail about a lot of things. You can also check that out. So any one of those things might be helpful for you as we do this. But let me give you some context for this particular passage. The really key thing to understand with Leviticus, and it's almost always worth saying like before you read anything in Leviticus, is this: God decided to move into the neighborhood. Okay, so this is the premise of the whole book. The people of Israel have been set free from slavery. They've come to Mount Sinai, and God has said, now that we're in a relationship together, I am going to move into the neighborhood. I'm going to be with you. You are building me a home. So they've built him the tabernacle, and his glory has come to live in this tent. And now the question is, okay, the neighborhood's changed a little bit. How do we actually live like this? And so it's almost like you're assuming if you were suddenly like the capital of the country was moved to Elburn, right? And now everybody in Elburn is suddenly in proximity to the president and the Congress and all of these powerful people. It would change the town. Like you would have to do different things when you approach certain people, when you went into certain spaces and so on. And this is like to the millionth degree. God himself is there. So there are things about relating to God and his presence in your community that change things. And so most of Leviticus is some aspect of that. Now, the really weird part is that it's in an ancient culture. So a lot of things they're doing seem very foreign to us, and we don't know why it's done. So we're going to be looking at a passage here that's about sacrifices. And this is a big part of what is done in order for people to come into the presence of God. They come offering sacrifices. And we look at that and we say, I don't know what that's for, what that means, why you do that. So we're going to talk about what they were and explain that a little bit. You will notice if you have read Monday's reading, I think we covered like 6 or 7 chapters in one reading. There is a reason for that. The descriptions of the sacrifices are very detailed, very tedious. And so we just kind of ripped the Band-Aid off. And so if you're like, oh my gosh, it's so long, you're welcome. You're welcome. Because you're not going to be doing it for a week. You're going to do it for one day and get a whole sense of this. So we're going to explain this. One thing to know, just for following along, there are 5 different kinds of sacrifices in Leviticus. We are going to read a passage starting in chapter 6, going through chapter 7, that describes in brief the 5 different sacrifices and what the priests have to do when they're giving those sacrifices. We are only going to read 3 of those, just so you get a flavor of it, okay? And then we're going to talk about what those are. So if you look at your headings, this is what Courtney's going to read. She's going to read, starting in Leviticus chapter 6, verse 8, this heading that says, the burnt offering. She's going to skip one, and then starting in verse 24, read the sin offering, and then skip one, and in chapter 7, read the fellowship offering, and then we'll talk about it. You guys ready for this?
All right.
Here
we go. The burnt offering. The Lord said to Moses, "Give Aaron and his sons this command. These are the regulations for the burnt offering. The burnt offering is to remain on the altar hearth throughout the night till morning, and the fire must be kept burning on the altar. The priest shall then put on his linen clothes with linen undergarments next to his body, and shall remove the ashes of the burnt offering that the fire has consumed on the altar and place them beside the altar. Then he is to take off these clothes and put on others, and carry the ashes outside the camp to a place that is ceremonially clean. The fire on the altar must be kept burning. It must not go out. Every morning, the priest is to add firewood and arrange the burnt offering on the fire and burn the fat of the fellowship offerings on it. The fire must be kept burning on the altar continuously. It must not go out. Skipping to verse 24, the sin offering. The Lord said to Moses, "Say to Aaron and his sons, these are the regulations for the sin offering. The sin offering is to be slaughtered before the Lord in the place the burnt offering is slaughtered. It is most holy. The priest who offers it shall eat it. It is to be eaten in the sanctuary area in the courtyard of the tent of meeting. Whatever touches any of the flesh will become holy, and if any of the blood is spattered on a garment, you must wash it in the sanctuary area. The clay pot the meat is cooked in must be broken, but if it is cooked in a bronze pot, the pot is to be scoured and rinsed with water. Any male in a priest's family may eat it. It is most holy. But any sin offering whose blood is brought into the tent of meeting to make atonement in the holy place must not be eaten. It must be burned up." The fellowship offering, chapter 7, verse 11. These are the regulations for the fellowship offering anyone may present to the Lord. If they offer it as an expression of thankfulness, then along with this thank offering, they are to offer thick loaves made without yeast and with olive oil mixed in, thin loaves made without yeast and brushed with oil, and thick loaves of the finest flour well kneaded with oil mixed in. Along with their fellowship offering of thanksgiving, they are to present an offering with thick loaves of bread made with yeast. They are to bring one of each kind as an offering, a contribution to the Lord. It belongs to the priest who splashes the blood of the fellowship offering against the altar. The meat of their fellowship offering of thanksgiving must be eaten on the day it is offered. They must leave none of it till morning. If, however, their offering is the result of a vow or is a free will offering, the sacrifice shall be eaten on the day they offer it, but anything left over may be eaten on the next day. Any meat of the sacrifice left over till the third day must be burned up. If any meat of the fellowship offering is eaten on the third day, the one who offered it will not be accepted. It will not be reckoned to their credit, for it has become impure. The person who eats any of it will be held responsible.
All right. I don't think we need to talk about that. It was very, very clear.
Wow.
Very straightforward.
Yeah.
Very relevant.
I mean,
really relevant.
God likes meat and bread.
Hey, look, who doesn't? Who doesn't?
That's right.
So
This was the beginning of the sourdough craze.
this is
Or Clayton's plain hot dog.
plain hot dog.
Yeah, right?
So there's no ketchup involved. Okay, so
Wow.
we're gonna try and break this down. One thing to remember about this is while this seems very strange to us, these were normal practices in pretty much every ancient culture and frankly in many modern cultures. We don't realize it, but there are sacrifices that happen in other cultures. This was a normal thing. We look at this as like, well, you're asking me to do what? It was normal in two ways. One, it was normal to sacrifice to your gods. It didn't matter what your god was. But also, they were an agrarian society, so they were used to killing animals. Mm-hmm. It was something that if you're like, oh, okay, you're going to have to, cut an animal and pour out the blood or whatever, you're like, well, I live on a farm, so when we do actually eat meat, this is one of my chores. You know what I mean? Like I have to go do this sometimes. So there are some things about this that are just foreign to us, and that's part of what makes us resistant. The other thing that's strange about it is if you are going to make a meal, how do you guys figure out how to make the meal? What do you do?
Recipe.
You Google a recipe.
You Google a recipe. Now, there's one way of doing that. You find a recipe, a written recipe, right? Now, if you sit down and read a cookbook, what are you usually doing? You're looking at the pictures, right?
Yeah.
Right? Like
Yeah.
you only use the recipe if you're doing something. Right? Like you don't just sit down and absorb it to be like, oh, I just want to ponder how much flour is in that thing, right?
Yep.
Like you look at the picture or you ignore the words, right? Or you go on YouTube and you watch someone making it,
Yep.
right? Mm-hmm. Or you do it with someone else who has done it and you learn through the doing. part of the challenge for us is this. This is the sort of thing that in modern times would be on YouTube, or you would learn from your mom or dad or whoever was teaching you how to cook. The priests were not looking at this saying, okay, check, 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 check. They were doing something, right? They were like going through the motions, and this was guidelines on how to do it. This is about as relevant to us as reading IKEA instructions that you're not going to build, right? And so that's why it feels some of the way you do. So some of it, when you feel that resistance, is just to say, okay, wait, this had a certain purpose. I'm not using it for the same purpose, so I can try to enter in a different way. So given that, what do you guys see? What do you observe? What stands out to you?
Just in the first one, the burnt offering, that he has to put on linen clothes with linen undergarments. Like, there's obviously more to it than just go out and tend to this, this offering, this fire. This is an involved process. There are clothes being changed.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a wardrobe change in the middle of it. Yeah. Well, and some of what's going on too is the clothes. You'll notice there's like a concern about what's clean and unclean and so on. And so there are things that you can use the clothes in this area, but when you go to the next area or we need you to do the next thing, these clothes have been used for this purpose. They can't be used for that purpose. And so there's this distinguishing of that. Anybody who works in a medical field for different reasons has the experience of like, no, I have to like remove these gloves over here and dispose of them in a certain way. I can only bring certain things across this door because in there, that's surgical area. So it needs a different level of cleanliness. Similar kinds of things are going on here for the ceremony.
Yep. All right, I have a question. Hey, Clayton.
Oh boy.
Hey, Clayton.
What's with the priests getting all the extra meat and hides and the goodies and it seems like is this why you became a pastor, because you get all the extra meat?
You know what?
When people
there are always leftovers at church, guys. You all know it.
It's true.
It is one of the things, it's not going to make you the most money, but you will have a meal multiple times a week that gets covered somehow. So that's
gotta
cool.
know which fridge to check.
You got to know which fridge to check. That's right. Okay, so a couple of things. One is we kind of have to go back to the idea of what is holy and not holy, okay? When we think of holy, we think of someone who's doing good things. That is not actually the meaning of holy at its root. The meaning of holy at its root is something that is set apart, and in this case, set apart to be used in God's presence, okay? So a way to think of it is if a wedding dress, right? You only use a wedding dress for one purpose in one context. To use it in another context is a little strange, to say the least. A flag, right? Like you use a flag in a certain context, but you don't do certain things with a flag because it wouldn't be appropriate to do that with a flag. There are certain things that you do in the context of a funeral or some ceremony that if you did something else in that context, it would be right. So we have these spaces where it's like, these things and these people and these tools and these spaces are used for only one purpose. And you don't use those things for other purposes. You don't take it out of the special place and start just using it casually. So I like to use the example in my mother-in-law's house. There's a birthday plate. It says it's your day on it. And if it's not your day, you don't get to use the birthday plate, right? Like if I just went over on a regular Tuesday and was like, I'm just going to use the birthday plate, they'd be like, what do you think you're doing? Using the birthday plate. You know what I mean?
It's my day.
It's not. It's like, so when something is offered, that offering is something that's treated as holy. It's offered up to God. Now, who can consume the holy thing? Someone else who is designated for that holy space, the priest. So some of it has to do with, at some point, you have removed this from ordinary use into special use, and now the priest can use it specially, but ordinary people can't.
Yeah.
The other reason is this. The priests came from a tribe that literally had no land. Okay, so we don't think about this because you think we get our food from a grocery store or a restaurant, but the priests and the Levites who operated the tabernacle, out of all of the tribes of Israel, they're in the land, they're going to get, you're going to get this territory and this territory, this territory. They got nothing, which means they don't get to grow any grain. They don't get to raise any livestock. They have no way of producing food for themselves, which means they're dependent on the offerings that come in. So when something is offered before the Lord for certain sacrifices, not all the sacrifices, some of it is set aside and given to the priests as part of the way that they feed their family.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah,
it's good.
Sorry, these are long explanations. It's all strange stuff.
It's the only answer.
Yeah.
What else do you see?
Well, there's so much that's striking. I feel like this could be a whole, episode of Hey Claytons. But the clay pot, the bronze pot, like, I just thought it was interesting and striking to me that they would have two different types of pots, and there's like instructions given for each one.
One gets broken, one gets washed.
One gets broken, one gets washed. If it's this, if it's that, it's, yes, it's a recipe, but a little bit of leeway given there.
It's sort of like, do you use a wooden cutting board or a plastic cutting board for the meat or the whatever?
Like the dark pan, you set the oven differently.
Yeah, all these things. So this is another concept. All right, so there's a lot that's like culturally foreign to us. So we talked about things that are holy and common, okay? Ordinary things like meat and clothing and all sorts of things that you have in your normal life, but then there are versions of those that are holy only for priests and then in the tabernacle. Another set of categories is clean and unclean. Something that clean and unclean is not like sinful and not sinful. It just means exactly what it means. Is it clean or not? And there are ritually clean things. So certain bodily fluids, certain encounters with a dead body, certain activities are said they're unclean, not because they're sinful, but because they are not presentable in a holy place. So the only way it is wrong to come in contact with something that is unclean is if you take that unclean thing and bring it into a holy place. Unclean happens all the time, but it shouldn't ever happen in the holy place. So there are certain things that when you say they have been become unclean, they have come in contact with something, they need to be cleansed so they can be used again. You have to ask the question, is there a way to cleanse them? In the case of the clay pot, there isn't. They're like, it's a one-time use thing. Once it's done, there's no like resetting it to usability. But with the copper one, you can wash it in a way that says it's kind of reset, cleansed from the thing that, made it unusable. And so now you can use it again in this holy ceremony. And so that's basically what's going on. It's can you cleanse it so that it can be used again? All right, let me give some context. Sorry, I know I'm doing a lot of the talking here. I love Leviticus, though, and so I feel like this is my offering to everybody to be the Leviticus nerd and talk about it. These different sacrifices, most of us who have been around church have some sense of like, here's what a sacrifice is. There's an animal, you've sinned, kill the animal, it dies in your place, you get forgiven. That's kind of the basic idea that if you understand, that's what you know. But then you look at this and you're like, wait. There's different sacrifices that seem to be doing different things, and there is no clear explanation. There's not like and here is the theology behind all of it. It's just described. If you start reading between the lines and putting things together, you can figure out what they are. But let me just sum it up for people, okay? So here are the 5. The burnt offering. The burnt offering is the one that gets burned all the time, completely consumed. No one eats any of it. Mm-hmm. That represents complete dedication to God. It's a way of saying it all belongs to God. Nothing is left back. And if you imagine it, you almost imagine this animal turning into smoke and rising up into heaven. It's almost a way of saying, I'm all yours. It's all coming into your presence. Second one on here that we skipped, it's called the grain offering, sometimes called the tribute offering. It's not meat at all. It's basically a piece of bread. Like you're making some flatbread right there. Mm-hmm. And what it is, it's just a way of saying thank you. Hey, I brought you this food as a way of saying I'm really grateful for what you've done for me. So it's just a thank you offering. The sin offering, we read that one, sometimes called the purification offering. That's the one that's more like what we're used to thinking of. Mm-hmm. You've done something that makes you unqualified to go into God's presence. You need to be cleansed of that. So you do this one, and they even have some things where the blood is kind of sprinkled on stuff, and it's a way of cleaning in this sense from sin so that you can enter into the presence of God. The fourth one that's on here, we skipped this one, is the guilt offering. This is when you've done something against someone and you need to pay them back. So you actually make reparation. Sometimes it's called the reparation offering. And then the fellowship offering is sometimes called the peace offering. And this is the one that you actually eat. Like you, the offerer, get to eat some of it. You get to sit there with the priest in the holy place and eat a meal. This is what happens when you say, I am eating a meal with God. That's why it's called fellowship. We're at peace with each other so we can have a meal. So I know that's a lot of detail, but this is really interesting. If you turn the page, when you read the next reading, and you start to see what the priests actually do in a normal ceremony, they offer 3 offerings, 3 of these offerings typically, and they do them in a certain order. First, they do the one that's the sin offering, and that's the one that makes you clean so that you can go into the presence of God. Then they offer the burnt offering. That's the one that ascends to God. It's almost like you're saying, as a worshiper, I'm giving my whole self to come into your presence. And then after that, you eat the meal with God with the fellowship offering.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost this progression of like, now I can come before you, give my whole self to you, and actually we can be together as people who could sit across the table from each other and eat. There's like, if you think about that in like a normal context of like a human relationship, it's actually kind of powerful. You know what I mean? To be like, I'm going to make it so our relationship is right. I'm going to totally surrender, and I'm going to share a meal with you. Like there's something meaningful about it. It's not just arbitrary, like kill an animal to make me happy kind of thing. It like represents something, you know?
Yeah.
So that's what's going on there.
I love that. It's this idea of being reconciled with God. There's been a break in trust, break in relationship, and there's a cleansing and a restoration.
Yeah. And if you were, we talked about this last week. If you were people who you knew you had failed, like they worshiped the golden calf, and God's presence shouldn't have gone with them, and God said, "I'm going to stick with you," and He said, "Here's the way that even when you fall into sin, even when you as fallen human beings, you're it's not going to be perfect. Here's a way to keep coming back into my presence and make it right. I still want to have you over to my house. I still want to have you over for dinner and eat a meal with you." That's an incredible message to send to somebody.
Yeah. And I will say too, just to offer up a resource, we were talking a little bit before this about this, but some of where I was able to make sense of this came actually from a children's resource. So it's a good one for parents, but it's also one that, sometimes reading a children's Bible will actually help you understand, because it puts it in the simplest terms. Leviticus is not something often represented in children's Bibles, but there's a resource called Kaleidoscope. I don't know if it's officially Kaleidoscope Kids Bibles but essentially what they've done is they've put different books of the Bible in more of a story form for kind of an elementary age kid. But they're really beautifully written. And there is one on the book of Leviticus that you can find online. And that actually described really exactly what you were described it in terms that were just really easy to understand. So I actually read that prior to, I've been reading that as I've been writing EPIC curriculum, and use that as a way to kind of help understand that. So just by way of helping others, pick up a kid's Bible, find a kid's representation, and Kaleidoscope's a good one. That's out there.
I haven't read the Leviticus one of that, but my elementary age son loves the ones that he has. He has Genesis and Acts and Matthew, and he loves to read those. So that's a good resource for a lot of things. So I recommend that too.
One observation I had was actually in a verse we didn't read, but it's part of the offerings in chapter 6, verse 21. It talks about the offering being an aroma pleasing to the Lord. And that struck me because I don't think I often think of God smelling things and like something being pleasing or repulsive to Him, which almost like gave it, like we're made in God's image. It's like, well, it makes sense that like we have a sense of smell. There are things that are pleasing, but then there are certain offerings that are particularly pleasing to the Lord. And it just made me smile.
Who doesn't love the smell of a barbecue, though?
Right?
You know what I mean? Like, that's,
some good bread.
That's what it's good. I do actually think it's interesting that these things please God, because God doesn't need any of it, right? So, like, we talk about like food, and it's we can talk about eating a meal with God, but He's not actually eating the food, right? We are, and the smell is good to us, but some of that is how we experience things. But it's so fascinating that God has said, "I'm going to have these things that I don't need be pleasing to me." I think of a friend of mine who was an elementary school teacher, and a third or fourth grade, something like that. And she would send her kids out to recess, and they would go out and they would come back and they would pick dandelions and they would bring them in and give them to her as an offering. And I'll tell you this, she did not need those dandelions. They were not the best flowers she'd ever received, right? But what did she do? She kept a cup on her desk so that every day they would come and bring these smashed up weeds in their hands, which in no way are intrinsically valuable to her. But they would put them in the cup, and that said, "I love you, Mrs. T," right? Like that's what that meant to her. And it pleased her to have a kid want to offer something that was of no value, but it was something that they could actually do, right? Like a little kid has very few ways. They can't go and buy you a Starbucks card or, buy you real flowers, but they can pick dandelions. And so in some ways it's like, look, I don't need your animal, but you know what? This makes sense to you. It's something you can do. It's something that the rest of your culture kind of makes sense out of. So I'm going to teach you. Here's a cup.
Yeah.
You do that,
Yep.
and it will please me. I'm not just pandering to you.
Yeah.
It will genuinely bring me happiness. That
good.
is incredible grace.
Yeah.
Let's back up before we go to message and meditation. I want to just ask the bigger question. What do you guys do when you get to a passage like this where you're like, I don't know, like there's just a lot here. It doesn't seem relevant, super confusing. And you're not sitting and saying, hey, Clayton, you're a Leviticus nerd. What do you think about this, right? What do you do with passages that just stump you at first?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I don't, sometimes the study Bible is helpful and other times it's just limited because it's got a page to do it. So I've got some resources that I go to online. Bible Gateway is a great one that has links to lots of different commentaries and things. So I can pop it into Bible Gateway. I can click into lots of different commentaries just to get some explanations on there. Recently, I've found the website gotquestions.org to be really helpful in some of that, where sometimes it's not a specific verse, but it's like I can just type in burnt offering and it has a lot of great content on that. So I found that to be really helpful in some of these confusing passages.
Yeah, I mean, I told you one of my like cheat codes is to read a kid's Bible. Again, rare that you find them on some of these, like the Pentateuch or, things like that, Kaleidoscope being a really good one. I listen to, I'll go find podcasts on things, not only the Bible Project videos, but also the creators of the Bible Project have quite a few podcasts that are really interesting to listen to. I also have just some trusted voices. So sometimes I will go and look and see who has taught on this, a little search to find out, are there people who have taught on these things that I trust and that I would listen to and, want to hear what they have to say, or something I could learn when I don't have, Clayton on in the room, of other people who I can look to and trust. And then there's also just something to hey, we talk about context, right? Read a little bit before it, read a little bit after it. Is that helping at all? Is it helping to frame it out a little bit more, to make sure that, I'm getting the full picture. Hopefully, if you're doing the Bible savvy reading, you are reading what's before it. But sometimes it's helpful even to go a little further after it. It's helpful for me, I get out my trusty markers and I'll go through and start doing maybe it's verbs, or maybe it's, there's certain, pieces of, just go back into your old ELA vocabulary and all of those things, and just start really looking and paying attention to what are the things that people are doing, who's doing those things, who's the who, what, when, where, why. Can I answer those questions? And then can I go find out a little more about those? Tell me about Aaron, tell me about Aaron's sons, tell me about the priests, and really kind of piecing that together. I mean, what would a detective do? What would someone using a scientific method do? You would stop and ask a lot of questions about it, and then try to seek out those answers from trusted sources.
Yeah. I think both of those are great because, one, you guys highlighted, you don't do this alone. So even you talking about going to a website, well, it's not just finding a resource. Those are people, right? Like other people have done those work. Sometimes I think we assume a mature Christian is going to be able to get something out of the Bible by themselves. That's what I'm imagining. Pastor Jim goes in the room and he figures it out by himself. I'm going to tell you a secret. Pastor Jim talks about the Bible with lots of people, and he reads lots of books written by people, and he's spent a lot of time listening to people's questions and saying, oh, what does that mean? These are not, nobody learns alone. And so the idea that I somehow have to figure it out all by myself is way too much burden. None of us do. I didn't figure anything I told you today from me. I just figured it out. Finally, I cracked the code, everybody. No, you learn it from other people. The other thing is doubling down on observations. It's look, you don't have to have it figured out. You can just say, what can I see? And can I be patient and slow down and see if I can see anything? The things I would add are this. Eric Ferris would say this often when he was on the podcast. He would say, sometimes what we do when we're confused is we zoom in, and that almost never helps. But zooming out often does, right? To get the big picture, I don't know what about the clothes and the fire and the pot and the thing. And it's you're not going to figure out the pot, okay? No. Zoom out and say, big picture, what's going on here? That often helps something. Final thing I'd say is, read tomorrow. What you could get nothing out of today, but if you keep reading tomorrow and the next day and the next day, you'll be surprised when you come around again that you do actually get something you never thought you'd get. But also, the losing the losing the battle is giving up on the Bible because some part of it was confusing, and so you didn't get onto the other parts that are going to not be as confusing.
Yeah.
Don't let that happen. That would be the thing I say. All right, let's move on to the M's in comma. Let's talk about message first. What would you get out of this passage?
Yeah, my message was dealing with sin is not easy, and sacrifice is not simple. And, again, you read through this, there's a lot of words, a lot of things. And in the end, I just kept thinking, you know what? Sacrifice is not simple. And there's an application to that, obviously. But the simple message for me was sacrifice is not simple and dealing with sin is not easy.
So my message has to do with an observation I didn't name, but there were a lot of times in this passage where the offering was described as holy. Like holy was repeated many times in this passage. And so I was just thinking, it's hard to read that and not think about Jesus as the ultimate offering being most holy for our sin. And so my message was quite simply, the offering has always been holy. Like there is, for the offering for sin, for my guilt, for, my failures, has always been holy.
My message looks at those three different sacrifices. And so God has made an accessible way for us to be cleansed, enter his presence, and have peace with him. Those three things: to be cleansed, be in his presence, and have peace with him. And in the context of Leviticus, those are sacrifices. We've already kind of alluded a little bit to it. But for us, that's Jesus, right? Yep. Like he's the one whose blood cleanses our sin. He's the one who wholly offers himself up to God so that we can enter God's presence. And he's the one who offers us the meal. You know what I mean? Like there is even something very literal about, and now we eat a meal with God when we celebrate communion. That's kind of what we're doing. Like all of this is really pointing at Jesus, even though it might get lost in some of the details. What an incredible gift that God has made a way for us to be cleansed, be in his presence, and have peace with him. All right, here's what we're going to do for meditation. You could, in theory, imagine what it's like to be at one of these sacrifices. For some of you, that might be really helpful to be like, okay, if you know this is for my sin, how do you feel about that? What emotions go through your mind as you do that? That's probably not helpful for everybody. I actually think stepping back again, zooming out a little bit here, and saying, okay, what are the postures that these offerings bring? We talked about ones that say sorry for your sin. Okay, one way to meditate, and this is what I'm going to invite us to do, is to spend some time saying sorry for sin. One of the offerings here was to say thank you for the good gifts that God gave. Can you spend time saying thank you? Some of them are to enjoy God's presence. Can you just worship God and enjoy being in his presence? In some ways, all the normal postures of prayer are the right way to meditate on these sacrifices. So here's what I'm going to have you do. Pick one of those: confession, gratitude, or praise, and spend the next 45 seconds communing with God. All right, let's talk about the A and comma application. What do you do in response to all of this?
Yeah, my message was that sacrifice is not simple, and dealing with sin is not easy. And so I'm just thankful that God made a once and for all way through Jesus. And so my application was just to really reflect on that, to be thankful that this is not, I'm not doing this every Sunday. I'm not coming in and making these sacrifices. But God has made a way for me that I can be thankful for that. God made a once and for all way through Jesus.
So my message was the offering has always been holy. So my application was to turn up the knob on my own reverence and appreciation of God's holiness. I was thinking about if I'm someone approaching the offerings, which in many ways is their act of worship, there was probably a high level of reverence of like, I need to follow the recipe. I need to make sure that hey, if I need to be cleansed or if I need to present this in a specific way, I better take this seriously. I better not do this casually. And there are times, I think, where I approach worship on a Sunday pretty casually. When I walk in and I've got my cup of coffee, or I'm looking at, there's that person. I haven't seen them in a while. And there is a lot of grace, I think, in that. But there's also a level in which I think just turn up the knob a little bit and think about hey, we're entering into a holy place with a holy God who actually was the ultimate offering for us. That I think I can read this and be like, you know what? I might take worship too casually sometimes, and I might need to turn that knob up a little bit.
Yeah. So my message is that God made a way for us to be cleansed, enter His presence, and have peace with Him. And I mentioned it kind of in the meditation that those sacrifices all kind of correspond to certain postures that we take. And so I actually think a good application for all of this is to say, okay, how am I going to say sorry? He's made a way for us to be cleansed, so I should come to Him with my sin and experience the forgiveness He's purchased. He's made a way for me to come into His presence and to offer myself up, the burnt offering. It's the whole person, the whole offering, ascending to God and saying, "I'm all yours." Where do I need to say, "I'm all yours"? I'm yours. And then to have peace with Him, to share a meal, to sit down and say, I can be with this God and be connected and have real fellowship. I need to worship that God and spend time with Him and just say, I want to enjoy being with you. I think that would be a tremendous way to apply this, to actually spend time and do this stuff that seems so obscure. You're like, I have no idea what it has to do with me. In some ways represents the most basic ways of relating to God. I'm sorry. Yes. Thank you. Please. The ordinary ways that we worship God. That's what we're supposed to do.
Thanks for hanging out with us. Join us again next Monday for a new episode where we'll be looking at another passage from the Bible Savvy reading schedule. And in the meantime, if you're not following along with the reading plan, check out BibleSavvy.com. Also, you can subscribe and leave a review on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Email us your questions or suggestions at podcast@BibleSavvy.com. Lastly, tell your friends, and we'll talk to you next week.